push came out of nowhere. 1 second, Evelyn and I were walking slowly past the old community well on our land, the same one my father dug with his bare hands back in 1952, and the next, my body was weightless. My chest lurched forward, my feet lost the ground, and in the blink of an eye, I was falling. Evelyn's scream tangled in the air with mine as we plunged into that deep, dark mouth of stone. The crack of my ribs against the jagged wall echoed louder than any church bell, and my skull rang as if someone had swung a hammer straight into bone. When we hit bottom, the world split open. Pain tore through my chest like knives, and the damp smell of earth filled my nostrils. Blood rushed into my mouth, and my vision blurred. My first thought was death, that I had just met it, that this was how my life ended. But through the throbbing, through the roar of my own heartbeat, came Evelyn's whisper, sharp and trembling in my ear, "Don't move. Pretend we're dead." Above us, I could hear footsteps crunching across the gravel. Then came the voice I will never forget. Our daughter-in-law, Patrice. Sweet, church-going Patrice who'd married into our family with a smile that fooled every neighbor in town. Her voice floated down like poison. Cold. That takes care of them. The footsteps retreated, fading toward the farmhouse. My blood ran colder than the damp stones beneath me. Evelyn gripped my hand, her fingers slick with sweat and shaking. The woman who had hugged us at Sunday dinners, who had kissed our cheeks like a dutiful daughter, had just tried to kill us. The well was no ordinary place. For decades, it had been the heartbeat of our land. My father carved initials into its side. Marcus, our firstborn, used to sneak beers down it as a teenager, and every family photo seemed to include it in the background like some old guardian. And now, that guardian had turned into a tomb. The silence above was almost worse than Patrice's voice. Because silence meant she believed we were gone. She believed her push had ended us. Lying there broken, I realized something far darker. This wasn't just about silencing us. Patrice had chosen this place for a reason. And before I could even begin to grasp why, Evelyn pulled her lips close to my ear and whispered something that froze my blood deeper than the fall itself. "Harold, Patrice knows what really happened to Marcus 25 years ago, and I think she killed him too." The air in that well was thick, damp, and smelled of rot, but Evelyn's words cut through it sharper than any blade. My ribs screamed with each breath, but I turned my head enough to see her eyes glisten in the dim sliver of light above us. Her voice was low, shaking, but steady enough that I knew she had been carrying this for years. "Marcus, our boy, our firstborn, the one who disappeared one summer night, leaving nothing but confusion and questions that the sheriff's office tossed into the unsolved drawer before the year was out. Folks in town whispered he ran off to Florida chasing some woman. Others claimed gambling debts. Some even said he just didn't want responsibility. But Evelyn never believed any of it. And truth be told, neither did I. For decades, my wife sat on the porch, rocking slowly in her chair, eyes fixed on the tree line, convinced Marcus would walk back through that yard. She'd tell me, "Harold, a mother knows." And while I nodded, I buried my doubts under work at the mill, at the church, at odd jobs fixing roofs and mending fences. I couldn't face the weight of thinking our son was gone forever. But Evelyn, she never stopped believing the story we were fed didn't add up. Now, hearing her whisper Patrice's name in the same breath as Marcus's death, my stomach churned with sickness deeper than my broken ribs. Patrice wasn't even in the family when Marcus vanished. She came later, when Darren, our second son, introduced her. But looking back, the signs were there. Evelyn once told me she caught Patrice staring too long at Marcus's photograph, not with sadness, but with something colder, almost calculating. Another time, Patrice slipped into Marcus's old room, touching his belongings as if they were her own. I brushed it off as grief, as her way of connecting to the man she married into, but Evelyn never bought it. Now I knew she had been piecing together a puzzle I refused to look at. "Evelyn," I croaked, my throat raw. "What truth? What does she know?" Evelyn's lips trembled, her body shaking from pain but also from something heavier, fear. Patrice didn't marry Darren for love. She married into this family because of Marcus. She knew him before he disappeared, Harold. She was with him the night he died. The words hit harder than Patrice's shove. A sound above jolted us. Gravel shifted near the mouth of the well. My heart stopped. Evelyn pressed her palm against mine, squeezing, urging me to stay limp, silent. Patrice's shadow leaned over the edge for a second, then drifted away again. My blood ran cold. She was checking to make sure we were dead. And in that dark hole, bruised and broken, I realized this wasn't just a fall. This was a family secret buried for decades, one that had finally clawed its way back into the open. I grew up on red clay and hard work. Our town in Georgia wasn't big, but it had a mill that hummed steady as a clock and paid enough to keep bread on most tables. I started there at 19 and stayed until the day they shut the doors. The place smelled like oil and warm metal, and when that big whistle blew at noon, you could hear it across the river and up through the pines. Saturdays were for fixing things. Someone's fence, someone's porch steps, someone's tractor that coughed more than it ran. Sundays were for church. We'd take the old Chevy down Maple Street, past the barber and the feed store, and pull into the gravel lot behind New Hope Baptist. Evelyn's had always matched her dress, and I kept a clean shirt in a paper bag so the dust from the shop wouldn't follow me into the pew. After service, we'd stand under the pecan tree while kids chased each other, and the older folks compared aches and recipes. That was life, plain, busy, honest. Our house sat at the edge of town, white siding that needed paint every other year, green shutters that Evelyn insisted made the place look fresh even in August. Evenings were for the porch. The fan in the window rattled like a jar of screws, and the sound of crickets rolled in from the pasture. I'd pull off my boots, pour 2 glasses of sweet tea, and listen to Evelyn hum while she folded towels still warm from the line. If a neighbor drove by, they'd honk. If they stopped, they'd leave with pie. That's the kind of home it was. Always room for one more plate, always a light on, always a chair you could borrow for as long as you needed it. Marcus grew up under that roof, and he made it proud. He was strong without showing off, the kind of young man who'd lift the heavy end without being asked. At the mill picnic, he'd help the elders out of their lawn chairs, pick up trash when everyone else was slow to do it, and somehow still end up leading the horses for the little kids without missing a beat. Teachers bragged on him. The pastor trusted him to stack hymnals and lock up. He had a way of looking people in the eye that said, "I'll keep my word." Folks knew it, and they handed him things that mattered. Keys, errands, the kind of talk a man doesn't share unless he believes the listener won't twist it or toss it away. He loved the land. He'd check the well every spring, scrape away leaves, run his palm along the stone like a man greeting an old friend. He carved his initials there one summer and got a stern talk from me, but I remember the grin he tried to hold back. The same one he had when he beat me at horseshoes or came home with a perfect report card. On Saturdays, he'd help me replace rotting boards on the fence. On Sundays, he sat between us in church and sang low enough that only the 3 of us could hear. When people said, "That boy will go far," I believed them with my whole chest. The night he vanished didn't feel special at first. The heat had gripped the town all week, and even after the sun fell, the air clung to your skin. Evelyn set a peach cobbler on the sill to cool. Marcus came down in a clean shirt, said he had to step out for a bit. Nothing big, wouldn't be long. He grabbed his keys and the old flashlight with the cracked handle. I remember the click of the back door and how the porch light made a small circle on the steps. I told him to be home by midnight. He lifted 2 fingers in a promise and disappeared into the thick dark. By 1, Evelyn was standing at the window. By 2, she had started whispering his name like maybe it could travel out and catch on his sleeve. By 3, I drove the roads I knew he liked, down by the river, around the ball field, past the diner where the night cook smoked when no one was looking. At 4, I woke the neighbor, and he woke his brother, and the 3 of us walked the tree line with flashlights that cut thin paths through the black. When the sheriff finally answered my call, he came with 2 deputies and the usual questions. We gave them everything we had, who he was with last, what he wore, how he'd been. They took notes, they nodded, they told us to go home and try to rest. We did not rest. Morning came like a slap. The sun laid itself over the yard, and nothing moved except the flies. Church ladies arrived with casseroles, as if grief ran on the same clock as potluck. The sheriff called from time to time that week. They followed tips. Someone said Marcus got on a bus. Someone swore he'd been seen near the station with a man from out of town. Another person claimed he'd headed south with a stack of cash. We opened our door to every rumor because not opening it felt worse. A month passed, then two. One afternoon, the sheriff folded his hat in his hands on our porch and told us the file would remain open, but there was nothing new to work with. That word, unsolved, landed like a brick in my stomach. He drove away slow, as if leaving any faster would be rude. The town did what towns do. After a while, people stopped asking. They still waved from their trucks. They still took pie when Evelyn offered. But the question left their eyes. Life kept moving. The mill whistle blew. The feed store opened every morning at 8. Babies were born, hands were shook, gardens were planted, and on Sundays, people sang. It felt wrong at first, and then it just felt like time doing what it always does, making room. Evelyn never made that room. She kept Marcus's jacket on the hook by the door. She washed it every spring and put it back where it belonged. She sat on the porch most evenings with her hands folded, eyes fixed on the bend in the road. A mother knows, she'd say, not loud, not for anyone but me and the empty chair where our boy used to sit. On holidays she set an extra place, not to be dramatic, but because hope is a habit that's hard to break once you learn it. She didn't cry much in front of others. She saved that for the laundry room with the door shut and the dryer humming so no one would hear. When Darren brought Patrice around, we were ready to be grateful for anything good. Patrice smiled, baked, hugged, said all the right things. She asked about family stories, about Marcus's favorite songs, about the way he liked his eggs. At first it felt kind. Later it felt like memorizing. I told myself I was reading too much into it. Evelyn said little, but her eyes stayed sharp. She kept the house just as it was, as if moving a chair would invite forgetting. Patrice would wander into Marcus's room to dust, as she put it, and I would find her fingertips resting on a trophy or a folded bandana longer than dusting required. I swallowed my questions because asking meant tearing at a bandage I could barely keep on. Back then, our porch was still a place for neighbors and laughter. Today, when I think about standing there with Patrice's voice floating down that well, that takes care of them. The distance between who we were and what we learned feels wider than the county line. We were a family that shared food and work and air. Now we were lying in a cold hole, our bodies broken by a woman who had eaten at our table and called us mom and dad. The mill, the church, the porch, the well, those weren't just parts of a place. They were the proof that love lived here. That's why it hurt the way it did. The same ground that raised our son opened up to swallow the truth, and the same hands that once passed us pie pushed us into the dark. Patrice came into our lives like a warm breeze in spring, soft, pleasant, and carrying the promise of renewal. Darren met her at a community event in Atlanta, a charity drive that filled the local papers with smiling faces and glowing praise. She stood out in the photographs, her hair tied neat, her hands folded just so, and a smile that looked like it belonged to someone raised on kindness. When Darren brought her home for the first time, Evelyn served her peach cobbler and sweet tea, and Patrice ate every bite with wide-eyed gratitude. She called Evelyn Mom before the night ended and hugged me at the door as if she had known us her whole life. The neighbors adored her right away. Patrice carried herself with a balance that felt rare, helpful without being pushy, polite without seeming fake. At church, she was the first to volunteer for the bake sale. At community cleanup, she tied back her hair, put on work gloves, and hauled bags heavier than some of the men could manage. She sent thank you notes to anyone who so much as lent her a mixing bowl. People whispered about how Darren had found himself a keeper, and the whispers always reached us with a kind of pride, as if we'd been responsible for raising the son who caught her eye. But Evelyn noticed things the town didn't. She noticed how Patrice took an unusual interest in Marcus's belongings. When Darren gave her the tour of our house, she lingered in Marcus's old room. The bed was still made the way Evelyn had left it, the quilt folded at the foot, the bookshelf lined with trophies, albums, and keepsakes. Most newcomers gave the room a passing glance, maybe asked a question about the boy whose absence had never been explained. Patrice walked in and sat on the edge of the bed. She ran her palm across the quilt slowly, like she was tracing something she remembered, not discovering something new. Darren laughed, made a joke about how tidy the room stayed after all those years, but Patrice didn't laugh. Her eyes were pinned to the photographs on the wall, the ones of Marcus standing tall at the county fair, holding his little league bat, leaning against the truck with that half-grin of his. Later that night, Evelyn found her back in that room. Patrice claimed she had gotten lost looking for the bathroom, but Evelyn said her hands were on Marcus's photo frame. It was the kind of thing that should have been innocent, yet Evelyn told me Patrice looked startled, like a thief caught where she didn't belong. The phone call started after Darren and Patrice married. Late at night, long after the lights were out, Patrice would step out onto the porch or into the kitchen. Her voice carried low but sharp, the kind of tone people use when they think nobody is listening. Evelyn caught fragments when she passed the hallway, numbers, names, promises. Once she swore Patrice said Marcus's name. Not just in passing, but whispered, drawn out, the way someone does when memory clings tight. Evelyn didn't tell me right away. She said it out loud months later, the night Patrice forgot to hang up fully and the line clicked back with a man's voice saying, "We can't risk them finding out." I wanted to believe it was all coincidence. I told myself Patrice was just respectful, curious, maybe sentimental. But those red flags stacked higher than excuses could cover. Patrice always had answers, and those answers always sounded right, until you repeated them back in your head later, when the house was quiet, and you realized they didn't hold water. The whole town saw her as the perfect daughter-in-law. She smiled at the right times, baked pies that won ribbons, and told everyone how lucky she felt to have married into our family. At potlucks, she set food in front of Evelyn before serving herself, a gesture that drew nods of approval from every corner of the room. When someone mentioned Marcus, she tilted her head just slightly, as if in shared sadness, and folks took it as proof of her compassion. But I lived in that house, and I saw the other side. Evelyn told me once that she woke to the sound of Patrice whispering in her sleep. The house was quiet, Darren snoring on one side, and down the hall, Patrice murmured through the thin walls. Evelyn leaned in the doorway and swore she heard her say Marcus's name, clear as day, followed by words she couldn't make out. When Evelyn asked her about it the next morning, Patrice laughed it off, said she must have been dreaming about an old coworker with the same name. But Evelyn's gut never trusted that explanation. Patrice wore a mask polished enough to fool everyone in town. But masks slip. And in those slips, in the long stares, the late calls, the whispered names, Evelyn saw something chilling that no neighbor potluck or Sunday service could cover. Patrice wasn't just devoted to our family. She was bound to it by something far older and far darker than love. Vernon Caldwell had been in and out of our home since he and Marcus were kids chasing each other barefoot through the fields. Back then, he was just another boy with scraped knees and a laugh too loud for the church ladies. But while Marcus grew into a man people trusted, Vernon's path twisted. By the time he was 17, he had a reputation for fast money and faster trouble. Folks whispered about late-night dice games in the shed behind the bar, about owing cash to people you didn't want to owe, about selling tools that didn't belong to him. He wasn't mean, not in the way of fists or fights, but his hunger for money made him dangerous in other ways. The last night Marcus was seen, Vernon was with him. They were spotted at the diner sharing pie, talking low over coffee cups. The waitress said Marcus paid the bill, slapped Vernon on the back and told her, "We'll be heading out." But Marcus never made it home. Vernon claimed he dropped Marcus at the edge of town near the old train depot, said Marcus had plans to meet someone else, someone he didn't name. The sheriff pressed him for details, but Vernon's story never bent. He wasn't charged, and without proof, the case went cold. Still, for Evelyn and me, his name stuck in our throats like a splinter. Years later, Vernon was still floating around town, older but not wiser. He worked odd jobs when money ran thin, but mostly he was seen leaning against jukeboxes and bar stools, nursing drinks he probably couldn't pay for. Every so often, his name would pop up when someone's truck was missing tools or when rent money mysteriously vanished from a neighbor's counter. People tolerated him the way they tolerate storms, unwanted but expected. Evelyn's ears were sharp even after all those years. One night, not long after Darren and Patrice married, she froze in the kitchen when Patrice's voice drifted in from the porch. Patrice was on the phone, speaking in low, clipped tones. Evelyn couldn't hear the words, but she caught the rhythm, the roughness in the voice on the other end. She told me later, "Harold, I'd know that voice anywhere." That was Vernon. The idea sat heavy between us. Patrice, the woman who baked pies for the church and called us mom and dad, whispering in the dark with the very man who was last to see Marcus alive. The connection was too sharp, too cruel to ignore. And then, lying broken in that well, the truth pressed down harder. Above us, footsteps returned, crunching the gravel near the rim. Patrice's shadow stretched across the circle of light, and a faint buzz carried down, the sound of her phone. Evelyn squeezed my hand, urging stillness. We held our breath as her voice floated into the night. Calm, certain, without a quiver of doubt. "It's done. They won't bother us again." My chest tightened until I thought my ribs would snap clean through. Patrice wasn't alone in this. She was tied to Vernon, the man who had walked into our home as a boy and may have helped bury our son as a man. And now, together, they thought they had buried us too. The well, once a symbol of family and survival, had become their hiding place for secrets. Only Evelyn and I still drew breath in its depths. And if we didn't find a way out, those breaths would be our last. The damp air clung to my skin, and for a moment I forgot the pain in my bones. My mind drifted back to when Marcus was 16, when he thought he was smarter than his mama and me. He and Vernon had lugged 2 lukewarm beers down to this very well, thinking no one would find them. But I knew my boy, knew the way his footsteps carried, knew the hush of guilt in his voice when he said he was just taking a walk. I caught him sitting on the stone edge, bottle sweating in his hand, grinning like he owned the night. I scolded him, but I remember fighting back a smile too. He was a good boy testing his edges, not yet knowing how sharp the world could be. Those stones still bore the marks of his youth. If you ran your palm along the rough surface, you'd feel the shallow grooves of his initials, scratched with a pocket knife. I felt them under my fingers as I shifted in the dark, a reminder that this well wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a piece of him, a place where his laughter once echoed against the walls. Now it echoed differently, filled with betrayal and the sound of Patrice's voice promising our end. Evelyn's whisper cut through the heavy air. "She chose this spot for a reason," she said, her voice thin but steady. I turned to her, and though her face was shadowed, I could hear the certainty in her words. "Marcus is here. She wanted to throw us where he already rests." The thought chilled me more than the damp earth ever could. Patrice hadn't just tried to kill us. She had tied our fate to the secret of our son's disappearance. The well was no longer just a marker of mischief or memory. It had become a grave of truths, a pit holding both the boy we loved and the betrayal that tried to end us. Its shadow pressed on us from all sides, telling us plainly, if we stayed silent, if we let our bodies go cold here, Marcus's story would die with ours. I reached for Evelyn's hand, our fingers stiff and trembling. No words passed between us, but a vow settled in the stillness. We had survived the fall. We would survive the lies. Patrice thought she had buried us with her secrets, but we carried something stronger than her mask: memory, truth, and the will to speak it. If we ever saw the light again, we would not waste it. We would drag every hidden thing from this well into the open air, for Marcus, for ourselves, for the life stolen from our family. For weeks before the fall, I noticed something in Darren I couldn't quite name. When he and Patrice came down from Chicago, he was there in body but not in spirit. He hugged us quick, the kind of hug you give an old neighbor, not your own parents. His eyes wandered when we spoke, always drifting back to Patrice as if waiting for her to signal the right response. I told myself it was city life changing him, different pace, different manners, but Evelyn didn't buy it. She leaned close one night after supper, her voice low so Patrice wouldn't hear. "Haven't you noticed how he goes quiet when she's here?" she asked. "Like he's afraid of saying the wrong thing." I shook my head, refusing to believe what she was suggesting. Darren was our boy, the one who used to build kites out of old newspaper, the one who cried when he left for college, promising to call every Sunday. "He's tired, that's all," I muttered. But even as I said it, doubt pricked at me. A memory came back sharp as glass. One night years ago, I found Darren outside on the porch, whispering into the phone. His voice was tense, low, urgent. When I asked about it, he snapped quicker than I'd ever heard. "It's nothing. Just work." Then he blamed me for sneaking up on him, said I made him paranoid. That wasn't my boy talking. It was someone carrying a weight he didn't want to explain. And when the talk of Marcus rose, when neighbors still wondered or Evelyn's eyes filled at the mention, Darren always shifted blame. Marcus made his own choices, he'd say, too quick, too practiced. Or worse, he'd change the subject entirely, acting as if the wound wasn't raw, as if our family's emptiness wasn't worth naming. Now, lying at the bottom of the well, I tried to push the thought away. Darren couldn't have known. He couldn't have had a hand in this. But Evelyn's grip on my arm told me she wasn't so sure. Her instincts had caught truths mine refused to face, and for the first time, I feared she might be right. Would you believe your own child could betray you? Comment below if you think Darren knew more than he ever admitted. The silence above stretched long after Patrice's footsteps faded, broken only by the sound of water dripping against stone. My chest ached with every breath, but Evelyn's words still echoed louder than the pain. "We must live to expose the truth." I pressed my palm against the wall of the well, feeling the rough grooves where time had loosened the stones. Bits of moss clung there, slick with damp, but enough for a grip. My fingers burned as I tested the hold, ribs protesting each small stretch. Evelyn's hand found mine, her touch both trembling and firm, steadying me in the dark. "Harold," she whispered, voice thin but fierce, "we can't die here." Near the base of the wall, half buried in mud, I spotted the frayed end of an old rope. It must have been left from years back when the well was still in use, weathered and stiff but not entirely gone. I pulled it free, fibers snapping, the smell of mildew rising sharp. With it, we tied knots around stones jutting from the wall, crude but desperate anchors. The climb began with pain sharper than any I had ever known. My shoulders screamed as I hauled myself upward, ribs grinding like broken glass. Twice my foot slipped, sending a cascade of pebbles echoing into the darkness below. Each time, Evelyn pressed her hand against my back, whispering prayers into the damp air, steadying me with the strength of her will. When her turn came, her body shook with effort, hands trembling as she gripped the rope. I braced myself beneath her, guiding her feet onto stones I knew could hold. At one point she slipped, nails scraping the wall, and my heart stopped. But she caught the rope again, teeth clenched, and kept climbing. Every inch upward was a battle, not just against the stone but against the weight of betrayal pressing down on us. Yet with each pull, I felt something change. The well no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a test, one we would not let Patrice write the ending for. The rim finally neared, a pale circle of light widening above us. My arms shook violently as I hooked my elbow over the edge and dragged my body onto the gravel. The sky spread endless, stars scattered across it like witnesses. Evelyn followed, collapsing beside me, her breath ragged, tears streaking through the dirt on her face. We lay there, broken but alive, staring at the same stars Marcus once pointed to on warm Georgia nights. We had clawed our way out not just of the well, but out of the death Patrice had written for us. Survival wasn't mercy, it was defiance. And from that night forward, every breath we took was a vow. We would not rest until the truth was dragged into daylight. The walk back to the farmhouse felt longer than any road I'd ever traveled. Each step sent fire through my ribs, and Evelyn's limp grew worse with every patch of uneven ground. But neither of us spoke of turning back. The night wrapped around us, and only the sound of cicadas followed as we dragged our battered bodies toward the place we once called safe. By the time the house came into view, the porch light glowed faint through the trees. We crouched low, breath short, as if we were trespassers on our own land. My heart hammered as we crept closer, gravel crunching under cautious feet. Through the window, the warm light spilled across the living room, and there she was, Patrice, her silhouette sharp against the curtains. She was pacing, phone pressed to her ear, voice just loud enough to reach us through the thin glass. "The inheritance," she said, her tone clipped, businesslike. "Once they're gone, it's clear. We finish what Vernon started, and nothing stands in our way." Evelyn's hand gripped my arm so tight I felt her nails through my shirt. We both froze, watching as Patrice stopped pacing and tilted her head back in laughter. Not the laugh of the sweet daughter-in-law who served cobbler at church picnics. This laugh was colder, drawn from someplace hollow, satisfied like a predator with its prey already caught. I surged forward, rage burning away every ache in my body. My fists clenched, ready to smash through the door and drag the truth into the open. But Evelyn pulled me back, her voice no more than a breath. "No, Harold. Not yet. If you go in now, it's our word against hers. We need proof." I looked at her, at the bruises darkening her skin, at the dirt streaked down her face, and I wanted to scream. Proof? We were proof, our broken bodies, our bloodied clothes. But Evelyn was right. Patrice's mask was too polished, her lies too practiced. The town believed her kindness, not our pain. Without evidence, she would twist the story until we were the ones made to look mad. So I let Evelyn hold me back, though my whole body shook with fury. We crouched in the shadows, listening as Patrice's voice dripped venom into the night. Every word carved deeper into the truth we already knew. This woman hadn't just stolen our peace. She had tied herself to Marcus's ghost and built her future on our graves. And until we had the proof to tear her mask away, we would have to stay silent in our own house, watching the viper coil tighter. Evelyn's voice carried the weight of certainty as we crouched in the dark behind the house. "Harold," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the shadow of the well, "Marcus never left this place. She brought us there because he's here. I can feel it." Her words weren't wild grief. They were steady, sharp, carved from a mother's knowing. I had spent years trying to bury that ache, to accept the story of a boy who vanished into the world. But Evelyn had never let it go, and now, after hearing Patrice whisper with Vernon, after climbing out of the very well where our son once laughed and carved his initials, I couldn't deny her. We waited until the house grew quiet, Patrice's light finally going out. Then, with the moon hanging low, we moved across the property, careful not to let our shadows touch the windows. Evelyn led the way, retracing the paths Marcus once walked. The creek bed where he skipped rocks, the oak tree where he and Vernon carved their names. Every corner of the land held his memory, but her steps slowed near the rotting shed leaning against the hill by the well. The boards sagged with age, the roof caved on one side, but the ground beneath was wrong. Soil too fresh, too loose, as if someone had disturbed it not long ago. Evelyn dropped to her knees without hesitation. "Here," she said, digging with her bare hands, clawing at the dirt as if the earth itself owed her an answer. I joined her, ignoring the sting as rocks split my skin. The soil gave way, clumps falling under our bleeding fingers. Minutes stretched heavy, sweat mixing with the iron smell of blood, until Evelyn's hand struck something hard. She pulled it free, and the moonlight caught the shine of metal, a pocket knife, dull from years underground. I took it, turning it over in my palm. On the handle, faint but clear, were the initials I had once traced on the stones of the well, MC. My knees buckled, and the knife dropped into the dirt. Evelyn cradled it in her hands, rocking back and forth, her voice breaking. "He never left us, Harold. He was here all along. The earth gave us more, shreds of fabric, too worn to tell color but small enough to have been Marcus's shirt." My chest heaved with rage so fierce it nearly drowned the grief. All the years of searching, of praying for a letter, a sighting, a rumor, when all along his story had ended here, hidden beneath our feet. Grief clawed at us, but with it came fury. Fury at Vernon, at Patrice, at every lie told to keep this ground undisturbed. I pressed my forehead to the dirt, fists sinking into the soil. Evelyn's cries turned into whispers, then vows. "We'll give him peace," she said, voice raw, "and we'll make them answer for what they did." That night, under the shed's shadow, grief and rage finally became one. And in that storm, our purpose was no longer survival, it was justice. The knife still rested between us in the dirt when Evelyn's voice broke through the silence. It was soft at first, almost as if she feared the night air might carry it too far. "Harold," she whispered, "there's something I never told you." Her words chilled me more than the damp ground. She kept her eyes on the pocket knife, her thumb tracing Marcus's initials as though it were a prayer bead. "The night before Marcus disappeared," she began, "I heard them arguing. Patrice and him. It was late after you'd gone to bed. I was passing the hallway, and their voices carried through his door." My breath caught. I had always wondered if there had been signs I missed, things I should have noticed. Evelyn's eyes glistened, heavy with the weight of years. She was pressing him for money. His savings from the mill, the little nest egg he was so proud of. He told her no, told her it was for his future, for building something honest. She laughed at him. "Harold," said he owed her, said she wouldn't be left behind while he got ahead. I felt my hands clench into fists. Patrice had always played the sweet daughter-in-law, always eager to help in the kitchen or charm the neighbors. But if Evelyn was right, she had started weaving her lies long before she ever married Darren. She threatened him that night, Evelyn continued, her voice shaking now. Said he'd regret choosing anyone over her. And then, the next day, Vernon came by. He told Marcus about some business deal, some easy money he could make. I heard them talking on the porch. Vernon said it was too good to pass up. Marcus was hesitant, but by evening he left with him. I stared at Evelyn, my chest tightening as the pieces began to lock together. "You think?" She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. It wasn't just Vernon. It was her. She wanted the money, and when he refused, she set him up. Vernon was the bait, but she was the one pulling the strings. Marcus didn't run away, Harold. He was trapped by the two people he should have been able to trust. The truth settled like ice in my bones. For years, I had thought Marcus might have simply left us, too restless to stay, too eager to chase some unknown future. That lie had gnawed at me, hollowed me out. But now I saw it clearly, he hadn't abandoned us. He had been betrayed, cornered, silenced. Evelyn clutched the knife to her chest. She killed our boy's future for greed. And then she married his brother to bury the trail. My vision blurred with fury. Every smile Patrice ever gave us, every false kindness, it all curdled into venom. She had stolen Marcus, and now she had tried to bury us the same way. I reached for Evelyn's hand, our fingers stained with dirt and blood. "We know the truth now," I said, my voice hoarse but certain. "And we won't let her hide behind that mask another day." Evelyn and I sat at the kitchen table long after the moon had given way to morning light, our bodies aching but our minds sharp with a new kind of fire. Rage wanted me to storm into the living room, drag Patrice by her hair, and shout the truth to the heavens. But Evelyn's calm hand on mine reminded me, if we moved reckless, we'd lose everything. Patrice had survived this long because she wore masks better than anyone. If we wanted justice, we had to be smarter than her lies. So we made a choice that cut deep. We would remain dead. To Patrice and Vernon, the well had done its work. If we kept out of sight, we could watch them, listen to them, and catch them in their own trap. That meant sleeping in the barn, moving like shadows, and ignoring the urge to reclaim our own home. Every groan of pain, every time my ribs screamed when I shifted on the hard floor, reminded me what we were fighting for. Proof was the weapon we needed. Each time Patrice whispered into her phone, Evelyn pressed the old recorder we dug out of a drawer against the window pane. Each time Vernon's rusted truck rolled up the drive, I noted the time, the words I could catch through the thin walls, the way they spoke of finishing it and money tied up in land. And when we uncovered Marcus's knife and clothing, Evelyn carefully wrapped them in cloth, setting them aside as if laying out pieces of a case yet to be tried. Still, gathering evidence wasn't enough. We needed someone to hear us, someone who wouldn't dismiss two old voices as ramblings. That's when Evelyn remembered her friend from church picnics long ago, Clara Johnson, who had since risen to a quiet but steady post in law enforcement. Clara wasn't the type to ignore whispers, especially when they came from someone she had sung hymns beside for 40 years. Evelyn wrote a letter in her neat, careful hand, never mentioning Patrice by name, only asking Clara to listen closely to what may come from this farmhouse. We left it where it would reach her without stirring suspicion. The waiting burned, but it was necessary. Each day Patrice grew bolder, her mask slipping when she thought no one could see. Each night Vernon's voice carried louder, their confidence swelling. They believed the well had swallowed us whole. And that belief was the very rope we'd use to hang their lies. If you were in their shoes, would you forgive Patrice or fight back? Comment below. The night was thick with heat, the kind that makes the air feel heavy, pressing against your skin. Evelyn and I crouched in the shadows of the barn, our breaths shallow, every muscle in our battered bodies taut with waiting. Clara's small recorder glowed faint in her hand, tucked safely behind a stack of hay. Tonight was the night. The snakes had slithered back to the farmhouse, believing the field was clear, believing we were nothing but bones at the bottom of the well. Through the cracks in the barn wall, we watched Vernon's dented truck rumble into the yard, headlights cutting across the gravel before dying into darkness. He climbed out slow, shoulders hunched, his face worn from debts and bad choices. A moment later, Patrice opened the door of our home as if it were hers by birthright, her smile sharp and cold in the glow of the porch light. Inside, their voices carried through the still night, every word slicing straight into us. Vernon spoke first, his tone low and rough. Marcus didn't deserve it, he muttered, but he wouldn't hand over the money. He wouldn't let it go. So I did what had to be done. Evelyn's grip on my arm tightened until her nails cut skin. My heart slammed against my ribs, not from shock, I had already guessed, but from the fury of hearing it spoken plain. Then Patrice's voice rose, smoother, crueler. Don't pretend you're some noble martyr. You wanted the cash as much as I did. And the old couple? They were sniffing too close. I had no choice. They're rotting where they belong. Her laughter rang out sharp, smug, like a knife twisting. You should have seen them fall. Two old fools thinking they mattered. That was the moment the fire in my chest burned too hot to contain. I pushed the barn door open, the creak loud in the quiet night. My shadow stretched across the yard as I stepped into the porch light, ribs aching, blood pounding in my ears. Evelyn moved beside me, bruised but unbroken, her presence steadying my rage. Patrice's face drained of color, her smirk collapsing into something feral. She stumbled backward, eyes wide, as if she'd seen a ghost. No, you're supposed to be dead. Vernon froze, his mouth working soundlessly, eyes darting between me and Evelyn like a gambler watching his last card vanish. I straightened as best I could, voice rough but loud enough to cut through their panic. Dead men don't walk, Patrice. And the truth doesn't stay buried. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of every mother's grief. "We heard you. Every word. Marcus's blood, our blood. It's all on your hands." The mask Patrice had worn for years shattered in an instant. Her shrieks filled the farmhouse, not words at first but raw, desperate sounds of a woman cornered. Vernon's hands shook, his tough facade crumbling. For the first time, it was they who trembled, not us. And for the first time since Marcus vanished, Evelyn and I stood not as victims, but as survivors demanding reckoning. The night broke open with the sound of tires crunching over gravel. Red and blue lights washed across the yard, flashing against the farmhouse walls like a warning from heaven itself. Vernon staggered toward the door, but it was too late. Clara stepped out first, her badge gleaming beneath the porch light. Behind her, two officers moved swift, weapons drawn, their voices sharp and commanding. "Hands where we can see them." Vernon froze, his bravado gone, sweat running down his face. Patrice shrieked, her voice cracking into hysteria as she clutched at the doorframe. "This is a mistake. They're lying. They were supposed to be dead." The words spilled too fast, too frantic, and with every outburst, the last threads of her mask unraveled. Clara's eyes never wavered as she signaled the officers forward. "We heard enough. Every word you spoke is recorded." The cuffs clicked tight around Vernon's wrists, his head hanging low, shame heavy on his shoulders. When they bound Patrice's hands, she fought, twisting and cursing, but the struggle only made her look smaller, pitiful in the same community where she once played the part of a saintly daughter-in-law. Neighbors gathered in the distance, roused by the flashing lights. They watched in stunned silence as the truth they never suspected spilled out before them. Patrice, the woman who brought pies to potlucks and smiled in church pews, was led away as a murderer. The whispers spread like wildfire. All this time, Marcus, the well, until her name became poison on their tongues. Darren was called in within days, dragged from his Chicago office in a storm of questions. Under pressure, his carefully rehearsed innocence cracked. He hadn't laid hands on Marcus, hadn't pushed his parents into the well, but he had known. He'd followed Patrice's instructions, moving money, signing papers, hiding the gaps that covered her tracks. Guilt painted him guilty, even if not of murder. The court gave him years behind bars, not for blood but for betrayal. When it was done, Evelyn and I stood outside the courthouse, the autumn wind tugging at our coats. We were battered, scarred, but upright. For the first time since Marcus vanished, we felt taller than the weight pressing us down. We were no longer the broken couple lying at the bottom of a well. We were survivors who had dragged the truth into the light, no matter how deep it was buried. Evelyn's hand slipped into mine, her voice steady, almost defiant. "They tried to silence us. But Harold, we made sure the world heard." And as the courthouse doors closed behind us, I realized she was right. We hadn't just fought for ourselves, we had fought for Marcus, for every truth hidden by lies, for every parent told to let go when their hearts still knew better. We walked away not as victims, but as the ones who endured, who clawed our way back from death itself to see justice served. Weeks passed, and the land began to breathe again. The well that once held secrets was sealed, its dark mouth covered with stone and iron so no life could be lost to it again. Where the old shed leaned, we placed a wooden cross and a plaque etched with Marcus's name. Neighbors came quietly, laying flowers and offering tears, no longer whispering rumors but speaking his memory with respect. For the first time in decades, his resting place was known, not as a mystery, but as truth. Evelyn and I returned to our porch, the boards creaking beneath us the way they had through countless evenings of our life together. We watched the sun sink low over the fields, painting the sky with colors Marcus once loved to chase as a boy. Evelyn leaned close, her hand warm in mine, and whispered, "He's home now." Her words carried no weight of grief, only peace. And I found myself staring toward the well's shadow in the distance, realizing that the very place that had nearly claimed us had also given us back what was stolen. It had given us truth. It had given us closure. We weren't victims anymore. We were the keepers of our son's memory, the ones who had survived lies, betrayal, and even death itself to see justice done. I drew a long breath, tasting the cool evening air, and let the silence of peace settle in. If you believe justice was served, type justice in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true American stories of survival and strength. And with that, the story ended not in shadows, but in light, resolved, complete, and carried forever in the hearts of those who knew the truth at last.